there is something happening inside you right now that has very little to do with logic. It is not a thought exactly. It is more like a pressure. A quiet, persistent sensation that something you have been holding back, something you have been pretending you do not need, something you have been telling yourself is either too much to ask for or too dangerous to admit, is beginning to push its way to the surface. You have probably felt it building for a few days already. That strange tension between the life you are living and the life you keep glimpsing at the edges of your imagination. The version where you allow yourself to want what you actually want, where you stop negotiating with your own desire, where you stop apologizing for the depth of what you feel. Tonight, the sky has something very specific to say about that tension. And if you have been awake enough to notice the pressure, you are awake enough to hear it. April 29th, 2026 is not a dramatic day in the way that solar eclipses or powerful retrogrades tend to announce themselves. There is no single thunderclap aspect, no planet-changing signs in the middle of the night, no once-in-a-generation conjunction completing itself at the stroke of midnight. What this day carries is subtler and in some ways more difficult to dismiss because it does not come from outside you. It comes from inside. The waxing gibbous moon moved into Libra in the early hours of this morning, and as it settled into that sign, it formed an exact trine to Uranus freshly established in Gemini. Those two events together created a particular kind of emotional opening, not a crack, an opening, a moment when the interior life becomes suddenly, briefly, startlingly honest with itself. And what your interior life has been quietly holding is about to become very difficult to ignore. This message was not made for everyone. It was made for the people who felt something shift in their chest when they read that title. The people who have been carrying something they have not said out loud. The people who know, at some level that does not require explanation, that they have been living slightly smaller than what they actually are. If that is you, keep listening, because the sky tonight is speaking directly to that part of you, and what it is saying is worth understanding carefully. Before we go further, I want to speak to something specific. If you have ever felt like the general horoscope is never quite talking about you, that is because it is not. The moon is in Libra for every person alive right now, but what it is activating inside your chart, which house it is pressing on, which desire it is pulling forward, what it means for your love life, your path, and the decisions sitting in front of you right now, none of that is the same as anyone else in your sign. A personal astrology reading built from your exact name, date of birth, time of birth, and place of birth tells you precisely what this sky is doing inside your specific life. Not in general terms, for you. You receive a personal audio reading delivered straight to your inbox and a detailed written report you will return to again and again. The link is in the description. Most people understand the moon in Libra as a pleasant placement, harmonious, romantic, a little indecisive perhaps, but essentially soft and socially graceful. And while none of those qualities are wrong, they are surface-level descriptions of what is actually a much more psychologically precise energy. The moon in Libra is not simply about romance or beauty or the desire for partnership, though it activates all of those. At its deepest level, the moon in Libra is about the confrontation between what you genuinely want and what you have trained yourself to want, based on what seems acceptable, reasonable, or safe to others. Libra is the sign of mirrors, of reflection, of understanding yourself through your relationship to someone or something else. When the moon moves through Libra, it turns that mirror inward, not outward toward the people in your life, but inward toward the relationship you have with your own desire. And here is where it gets uncomfortable for most people. The moon in Libra, when it is waxing, meaning when it is building in light and not yet full, is a moon of accumulation. It is gathering emotional information. It is asking you to be honest, not about what you have, but about what you actually want. And Libra's particular difficulty is this. It is the sign most likely to have suppressed what it wants in the name of keeping the peace, in the name of being fair, in the name of not asking for too much, or not appearing too needy, or not disrupting an equilibrium that was never truly balanced to begin with. So when this moon moves through Libra in its waxing gibbous phase, which is the phase of increasing illumination, of pressure building toward fullness, it does something very particular. It illuminates the gap between what you have settled for and what you actually hunger for. The gap between the relationship dynamic you have accepted and the one that your soul has been quietly petitioning the universe for. The gap between the life you have carefully constructed to feel manageable and the life that would actually feel like yours. On April 29th, the moon in Libra is at approximately 11 degrees and climbing. It is waxing toward the full moon that arrives on May 4th in Scorpio. Every night between now and that full moon, the light increases. Every night more is revealed. Tonight is not the revelation, it is the accelerating approach of it. And that approach feels, from the inside, exactly like pressure. Now add Uranus, and everything becomes more electric. Uranus entered Gemini on April 25th, just 4 days before this. It is brand new in this sign. The last time Uranus occupied Gemini was between 1942 and 1949, a period that rewired global communication, scientific understanding, and the basic architecture of how human beings transmitted information to one another. Uranus in Gemini is a 7-year transit that rewires the signal. It does not simply change what people think, it changes how thought itself moves between minds. In personal terms, Uranus in Gemini electrifies the mind. It speeds up perception. It introduces sudden clarity into situations that had been murky. It sends information in unexpected ways, through dreams, through chance conversations, through the sudden arrival of an idea that you cannot unhear. Uranus in Gemini breaks old mental loops. The thought patterns you have been cycling through for years, the story you have been telling yourself about why you cannot have what you want, about why it is not realistic, about why other people get to want those things but not you, Uranus in Gemini begins short-circuiting those loops with the precision of a lightning strike. When the moon in Libra forms a trine to Uranus in Gemini, those two energies enter a state of easy, flowing cooperation. The trine is a 120-degree angle, the aspect of natural harmony. What this means on April 29th is that the emotional honesty the Libra moon is generating, that uncomfortable illumination of the gap between what you have and what you want, is being directly supported by Uranus's electrical rewiring. The mental static that usually protects you from knowing what you want clears suddenly. The justifications that keep you comfortable in your smallness lose their power for a moment. And in that moment, the thing you have been too afraid to want becomes briefly but unmistakably visible. This is not a comfortable transit. It is, in the deepest sense, a kind moment. It shows you something true. The true things are not always what we have been hoping to see. What prevents this energy from being simply disruptive rather than meaningful is the presence of Jupiter in Cancer, who has been holding a very particular space in the sky since last summer and who continues to do so now. Jupiter is in its sign of exaltation in Cancer. This is one of the most emotionally generous placements in the zodiac. Jupiter in Cancer expands the capacity for emotional depth. It enlarges what the heart can hold. It increases the ability to feel, to nurture, to receive, to trust in the long arc of things rather than simply the immediate moment. In a sky that contains Uranus sparking sudden awareness and a moon in Libra pressing on suppressed desire, Jupiter in Cancer provides the container. It ensures that what is revealed tonight has somewhere to land. It ensures that the desire that surfaces is not simply restless wanting, but something deeper, something rooted, something that has been growing in you quietly while you were busy convincing yourself you were fine with less. Jupiter at approximately 18 degrees Cancer on April 29th is forming a gentle emotional backdrop for everything the moon and Uranus are stirring up. It is not making a sharp aspect to either of them. It does not need to. Jupiter in Cancer is simply present, the way a deep lake is present. It does not rush, it does not demand. It simply holds more than you realized it could. There is also Saturn and Neptune moving together in Aries, both sitting in the early degrees of that sign, continuing to ask the harder structural questions about what you are building with your life and whether the foundation beneath it is made of real material or of something that only looked solid because you were afraid to press on it. Saturn and Neptune in Aries do not allow comfortable self-deception for long. What they ask is different from what the Moon and Uranus ask, but it converges with the same pressure. On April 29th, the entire sky is oriented in the same direction, toward honesty, toward the thing you have been circling without naming. This is the part of the transmission that requires you to stay with it rather than skim past it. The phrase "too afraid to want" is not about fear in the dramatic sense. It is not about things that seem impossible or wildly unrealistic. What people are most afraid to want is almost never the impossible. It is the possible. The thing that is close enough to actually have that wanting it feels genuinely dangerous. Because if you want it, and you do not get it, the loss is real. If you want it, and you pursue it, and it falls apart, you cannot tell yourself it was never really yours to begin with. The protection that comes from pretending you do not want something is the protection of never having to grieve it fully. The Libra moon in its waxing phase strips that protection away. Not harshly, gradually, and then all at once. The waxing gibbous moon builds. It builds like the approach of something you cannot entirely see yet, but can feel in the air around you. And tonight, for a significant number of people listening to this, what is building is an admission, not to anyone else, to themselves, about what they have been quietly, persistently, deeply wanting, and what they have been doing instead of wanting it, which is finding very sophisticated reasons why they should not want it, or should not have it, or should wait a little longer, or should make sure someone else is comfortable first, or should earn it more before claiming it. The Libra archetype is particularly vulnerable to this pattern because Libra's core instinct is relational. It feels the impact of its desires on others before it fully registers the desire itself. A Libra-influenced emotional state, which is what the moon in Libra creates for everyone regardless of their natal sign, will often delay its own wanting in order to ensure that the wanting will be received well, will not disturb the balance, will not ask for too much. Tonight, Uranus in Gemini is short-circuiting that delay. It is not asking for permission. It is simply showing you what is true. What is true may be about a relationship. It may be about a creative life that you have been shrinking in order to fit someone else's idea of who you are. It may be about a conversation you have been avoiding for months, because having it would require you to say something that cannot be unsaid. It may be about a feeling you have for a specific person that you have been rationalizing away because the timing seems wrong, or the circumstances seem complicated, or you are not sure the feeling would be returned. It may be simpler than any of those things. It may simply be the desire to be known, fully and without editing yourself, by someone who actually wants to know you. Whatever it is surfacing tonight, and the question the sky is asking is not, what are you going to do about it? Not yet. The question for right now, on April 29th, is simpler and more primary than that. The question is, can you admit to yourself that you want it? Aries, the moon in Libra is crossing your 7th house of partnership, and the trine to Uranus in Gemini is reaching your 3rd house of communication. What activates for you tonight is a conversation you have not had, not with someone else first, with yourself. Something about the shape of what you want from your closest connections has shifted recently, and you have been trying to find the right words for it. Tonight, those words arrive, not all at once, but enough of them that you can no longer pretend the feeling is not there. Saturn and Neptune in your own sign are pressing you toward a more honest expression of who you are becoming. The partnership desires surfacing now are not the same ones you carried a year ago. They belong to a newer version of you, one that requires something more substantive from the people who claim space in your life. Taurus, the moon in Libra lights up your sixth house, the house of daily life, of health, of the actual texture of how you spend your days. And Uranus in Gemini is newly arrived in your second house of resources, worth, and what you genuinely value. What surfaces tonight for you is not about grand romantic gestures. It is about something closer and more persistent than that. The way your daily life feels. Whether the ordinary shape of your days reflects your values, or whether you have been building a comfortable routine around a version of yourself that has already outgrown it. The desire that emerges for you may be for something that looks very simple from the outside. Space, ease, a life that does not require constant management. Jupiter in Cancer in your third house ensures that whatever becomes clear tonight has been quietly forming in the background of your thinking for quite some time. Trust the clarity even if it requires rearranging things that felt settled. Gemini, this Moon and Uranus alignment lands with particular force for you because Uranus is freshly in your sign. The waxing Libra Moon in your fifth house of joy, creative expression, and the kind of love that makes you feel alive is forming a trine to Uranus newly stationed in your first house of identity and self. This is an activation of your relationship with pleasure itself, with allowing yourself to be lit up by something. You have been in a period of recalibration, perhaps without quite naming it as that. Something about the way you have been expressing yourself, what you have been creating, who you have been allowing yourself to delight in, has been under review. Tonight, something shifts in that review. A permission arrives, not from outside you, from inside you. The desire to be fully alive in your own particular frequency, to stop softening it for anyone, is clarifying tonight in a way that it has not for some time. Cancer, the Moon in Libra moves through your fourth house of home, roots, family, and emotional foundation. The trine to Uranus in Gemini activates your 12th house, the house of what is hidden, what you carry privately, what you have not yet brought into the light of ordinary life. What emerges for you tonight has deep roots and has probably been growing in the quiet of your interior life for longer than you realize. There is something you want that feels almost too personal to admit, as though naming it would make it too real, too exposed. The 12th house activation means this desire has been living largely in dreams, in moments of solitude, in the feeling that arrives when everyone else has left the room. Jupiter in your own sign is reminding you that your emotional instincts are not leading you wrong. What you have been holding privately deserves more room than you have been giving it. Leo, the Libra Moon illuminates your third house of communication, local environment, and the quality of your mental and verbal life. Uranus in Gemini is now in your 11th house of community, friendship, and the dreams you hold for your collective future. What surfaces for you tonight is about belonging, and whether the circles you currently move in reflect who you are actually becoming. There may be a desire for a conversation that changes a dynamic, for honesty in a friendship that has been operating on pleasantries, or for the admission that the community you once fit neatly into no longer quite contains you. This is not about rejection, it is about growth that has outpaced the container. Saturn and Neptune in your 9th house are asking larger questions about belief and philosophy. What you want from your community and what you believe about your place in the world are being asked to align more closely than they have been. Virgo, the Libra Moon is in your 2nd house of self-worth, resources, and what you assign value to. The trine to Uranus in Gemini moves into your 10th house of public life, vocation, and the contribution you are here to make. What activates for you tonight is the desire to be valued, not appreciated in a vague social sense. Actually valued, which means compensated fairly, recognized genuinely, and given the kind of creative or professional latitude that matches what you are actually capable of. The South Node in your sign has been pulling at the pattern of making yourself useful in ways that leave you invisible. Tonight, the Libra Moon illuminates what you deserve, and Uranus in your 10th house delivers a sudden flash of clarity about where that deserving should be reflected in your actual professional life. The desire that surfaces may be about work, about money, or about the courage to position yourself differently in the world. All of those are the same desire at their root. Libra, the moon is in your sign tonight, and because of that, this transit is not something you are observing from a comfortable distance. It is something you are inside of. The moon in Libra in your first house of self is forming a trine to Uranus, newly arrived in your ninth house of belief, expansion, philosophy, and the wider world. What surfaces for you is the most intimate and the most expansive version of the same desire. The desire to understand yourself more truly, and from that understanding to step into a life that is wider than the one you have been allowing. Libra's tendency to define itself through relationship means you may have been organizing your sense of self around what others need from you, rather than around what you actually are. Tonight, with the moon in your own sign and Uranus electrifying your ninth house, a reorientation happens. What you want is not just a relationship or a partnership. It is a life that has room in it for the full version of who you are becoming. A life that does not ask you to be smaller in order to keep others comfortable. Scorpio, the moon in Libra, is in your 12th house, the house of retreat, of what happens beneath conscious awareness, of the things you process privately before they are ready for the world. Uranus in Gemini is now in your 8th house of deep transformation, shared resources, and the bonds that change who you are. This is a deeply interior activation. What surfaces for you tonight may not arrive as a clear thought or a definable desire. It may arrive as a feeling, a dream image, a sudden awareness of something you have been carrying without realizing how heavy it has become. The desire being illuminated in your 12th house is one you have perhaps not said out loud, even to yourself. It involves surrender, not giving up, the kind of surrender that is actually a deeper form of trust. The desire to let someone in, fully in, without the armor you have been wearing so long it has started to feel like skin. Sagittarius, the Libra moon moves through your 11th house of community, future visions, and the hopes you hold for what is possible. The trine to Uranus in Gemini reaches into your 7th house of partnership, significant others, and the one-on-one bonds that shape your direction. What activates for you tonight is the relationship between your freedom and your desire for genuine connection. You have probably been navigating a quiet tension between the life you want, which involves a significant degree of movement, exploration, and personal liberty, and the love you want, which requires a degree of presence, commitment, and shared roots. Tonight that tension clarifies. The desire being illuminated is not about choosing one over the other. It is the admission that you want both, and that you have perhaps been settling for one while quietly grieving the absence of the other. Capricorn, the moon in Libra, is in your 10th house, the house associated with your sign, the house of public standing, achievement, and the life you have built. The trine to Uranus in Gemini moves into your 6th house of daily routine, health, and the actual lived texture of your days. What surfaces for you tonight is something that lives right at the intersection of success and satisfaction. You may have accomplished a great deal by external measures, and yet there is a persistent, quiet sense that something in the architecture of your daily life does not match what you actually need in order to feel genuinely well. The desire that emerges is not for more achievement. It is for a different quality of life inside the achievement you have already reached. For something that feels sustainable rather than simply structured. For a daily experience of your own existence that actually nourishes you rather than simply functioning. Aquarius, the moon in Libra, is in your 9th house of philosophy, higher learning, travel, and the beliefs that orient your life. The trine to Uranus, newly established in Gemini, activates your 5th house of creative expression, joy, romance, and the kind of love that is not duty, but delight. Pluto has been moving through your sign for some years now, and has been dismantling your sense of self in ways that are ongoing and not entirely comfortable. Tonight, the Libra moon and Uranus in Gemini reach into the part of you that is not about deconstruction, but about pleasure, about what lights you up, about the desire to create something from the deepest part of who you are and to share it with someone who can actually meet it. The desire being activated tonight is the desire to be seen in your joy, not just respected in your intelligence. Pisces, the North Node, is in your sign right now, 7 degrees of Pisces. And the moon in Libra is moving through your 8th house of transformation, depth, and the bonds that go beneath the surface of ordinary connection. The trine to Uranus in Gemini reaches your 4th house of home, roots and emotional foundation. What surfaces for you tonight is something about the place where you feel most fully yourself, which may not be a physical location, but rather a particular quality of intimacy. There is a desire in you for home that is not a house, for the feeling of being fundamentally safe with another person, of not having to translate yourself or compress yourself or perform a version of yourself that is easier for others to hold. The North Node in your sign is pointing you toward exactly that quality of experience. Tonight, the desire for it becomes harder to ignore. It is worth understanding the particular quality of time you are moving through right now, because what April 29th initiates does not complete itself today. The moon is waxing, building toward fullness. The full moon arrives on May 4th in Scorpio, and that full moon will be a very different emotional experience from what tonight offers. Where tonight is about the rising of desire, about the clarifying of what you want, the Scorpio full moon on May 4th will be about depth, about what has to be released in order for the thing you want to have room to arrive. These two events are connected. They are part of the same emotional arc. What this means practically is that the desire that surfaces tonight is the beginning of something, not the conclusion of it. You do not need to act on it by morning. You need to acknowledge it. You need to sit with it honestly and resist the temptation to immediately talk yourself back out of it with the reasoning that served you before Uranus cleared the static. Uranus in Gemini is brand new in that sign. Its influence over the next 7 years is going to continue rewiring the way you understand yourself, communicate with others, and receive information that matters. What it showed you tonight is just the opening frame of a much longer revelation. The information you received today, the admission you made to yourself about what you have been afraid to want, is not a one-time event. It is an opening, and openings once made do not easily close again. Jupiter in Cancer between now and late June is holding the emotional depth that makes this opening meaningful rather than simply disorienting. It is reminding you that your desire is not a problem to be managed. It is evidence of what you are capable of how fully you can love, of how much you are able to receive when you stop blocking what is being sent. The days between April 29th and the Scorpio full moon are days for feeling, for noticing, for writing things down if that helps you process, for sitting with what surfaced tonight without rushing it toward a conclusion. The conclusion will come. The full moon will bring it. For now, the invitation is simply to let yourself know what you know. Every astrological event carries an invitation, and the quality of the invitation shapes what kind of response is meaningful. Transformation portals ask for action. Eclipse seasons ask for surrender. Mercury retrograde periods ask for review. But a moon in Libra trining Uranus in Gemini during a waxing phase does not ask for action or surrender or review. What it asks for is courage of a quieter kind. The courage to admit something privately that you have been reluctant to admit. The courage to hold a desire without immediately killing it with qualifications. The courage to sit in the discomfort of knowing what you want before you know whether it is possible. This kind of courage is harder than most people acknowledge. There is a cultural story that suggests wanting is easy and achieving is hard. But for many of the people listening to this, the actual difficulty is the wanting itself, the allowing, the permission, the willingness to need something, to actually need it without immediately constructing an emergency exit in case the need is not met. The Libra moon tonight is asking you to stay in the room with your desire for a little longer than feels comfortable. To not reach for the first reasonable justification for why you should not want what you want. To let it be real for long enough that you can actually see it clearly. Uranus in Gemini has done its part. It cleared the static. It delivered the message with the sudden, undeniable clarity that only Uranus can produce. The message has been received. What you do with it, How honestly you sit with it in the days before the Scorpio full moon will determine whether this particular activation becomes simply another moment of clarity that you allow to dissolve, or whether it becomes the beginning of an actual shift. The sky has been honest with you tonight. The moon in Libra showed you the gap between what you have and what you want. Uranus in Gemini made that gap briefly impossible to argue away. Jupiter in Cancer is holding the emotional depth that gives the desire meaning. Saturn and Neptune in Aries are pressing on the structural questions that make it real rather than abstract. Everything the sky is doing right now is oriented toward one thing: getting you to admit to yourself, finally and without your usual negotiation, what you have been too afraid to want. You already know what it is. You have probably known for longer than tonight. Tonight simply made it harder to look away from. The Libra moon is waxing. The light is building. The full moon is 5 nights away. Between now and then, let yourself know what you know, not to perform it, not to announce it, simply to acknowledge it, privately and honestly, in the way that only you can. That acknowledgement is the beginning. And the beginning, once made, is not a small thing. If this transmission reached you in a way that landed somewhere real, please leave a comment below, subscribe so that you receive every piece of sky wisdom meant to find you, and share this with someone who has been needing permission to feel what they feel. I will see you in the next one.